Good morning, brethren, and welcome to our bi-weekly program entitled A Glance at the Word, which is broadcast live on Facebook every Monday and every Wednesday at 8:30 a.m. West Africa time, which is GMT +1. Today is Monday, the 20th of December 2021, and our topic this morning is entitled The Power of Sacrifice. The power of sacrifice. The power of sacrifice. Let's first read in the book of Genesis, chapter 18, verses 1 to 11. Genesis chapter 18, verses 1 to 11. Let's read. Then the Lord appeared to him is Abraham. Then the Lord appeared to him by the terebinth trees of Mamre, as he was sitting in the tent door in the heat of the day. So he lifted his eyes and looked, and behold, 3 men were standing by him. And when he saw them, he ran from the tent door to meet them, and bowed himself to the ground, and said, My Lord, if I have now found favor in your sight, do not pass on by your servant. Please let a little water be brought, and wash your feet, and rest yourselves under the tree, and I will bring a morsel of bread, that you may refresh your hearts. After that you may pass by, inasmuch as you have come to your servant. They said, Do as you have said. So Abraham hurried into the tent to Sarah and said, Quickly, make ready 3 measures of fine meal, knead it, and make cakes. And Abraham ran to the herd, took a tender and good calf, gave it to a young man, and he hastened to prepare it. So he took butter and milk and the calf which he had prepared, and set it before them. And he stood by them under the tree as they ate. Then they said to him, Where is Sarah your wife? So he said, Here in the tent. And he said, I will certainly return to you according to the time of life, and behold, Sarah your wife shall have a son. Sarah was listening in the tent door, which was behind him. Now Abraham and Sarah were old, well advanced in age, and Sarah had passed the age of childbearing. Let's also read Genesis chapter 21, verses 1 to 5. Genesis chapter 21, verses 1 to 5. Let's read. And the Lord visited Sarah, as he had said, and the Lord did for Sarah as he had spoken. For Sarah conceived and bore Abraham a son in his old age, at the set time of which God had spoken to him. And Abraham called the name of his son who was born to him, whom Sarah bore to him, Isaac. Then Abraham circumcised his son Isaac when he was 8 days old, as God had commanded him. Now Abraham was 100 years old when his son Isaac was born to him. So you see, we know the story of Abraham, our father in the faith. We know that Abraham was 75 years old when God first made him the promise that he would become the father of a multitude of nations. Thus, at that age of 75, Abraham was expecting to have at least one child with his wife Sarah. Sarah, who was then 65 years old. Yet things were not that simple. Things were not going on as they expected. Things were very hard for them, because 24 years after that first time that God made them the promise, 25 years after this time, while Abraham was already 99 years old and Sarah 89 years old, they still had no child at all. So 24 years after the promise, Abraham and Sarah were still and always childless. And moreover, as we read, Sarah had already passed the time of childbearing. So she had menopause. She couldn't have any child anymore. So they have lost all hope of having a child again. Then one day, when Abraham was 99 years old, and while it was very hot on that day, Abraham decided to sit in his tent door. And from his tent door, he could watch and observe all the surroundings, and he could see what was going on around him. And he could also see the path on which people could be passing by. Thus, when he lifted his eyes, as we read, he saw three men not very far from him. Those three men were standing, which means that they were not moving at all at that time. And Abraham did something very amazing. He ran to them. This was amazing for a 99-year-old man. So in spite of his 99 years of age, and in spite of the scorching heat, Abraham ran to these men who, as we know, were in fact angels sent by God. These men who, being angels sent by God, were representing God himself. You know, Abraham ran to them. We know how hard it is for a young man to run in a scorching heat, let alone an old man like Abraham, and mainly a 99-year-old man like Abraham, to run in a scorching heat. So it was a great sacrifice for Abraham to run in a scorching heat to these three men. Yet he did it. And not only did he do that sacrifice, but he hurried into his tent to ask his wife Sarah to bake cakes. He didn't walk either slowly or at a normal pace. He hurried into his tent, which means that he walked very fast. This too was another sacrifice for a 99-year-old man, to walk very fast in the heat. After that, Abraham ran again. This time he ran to the herd. This also was a great sacrifice for a 99-year-old man to run for a second time within a few minutes. Moreover, to run for a second time in a scorching heat. All that just within minutes. Finally, he offered the three men all that he had prepared for them, and he offered it to them diligently. And remember that these three men were representing God himself. Thus, Abraham offered a sacrifice to God, and he offered that sacrifice diligently. You know, in the ancient Testament, sacrifices were animals that were being slaughtered, that were being killed and burned to offer them to God. But nowadays, what can we call a sacrifice? A sacrifice is something that costs us much, or something that pains us while being for the interest of or the benefit of someone else. So for us today, a sacrifice is something very dear, something very costly, something very precious that pains us and which we offer to God. Abraham offered his sacrifice to God, and he offered that sacrifice with diligence. And God accepted that. He offered his sacrifice to God willingly, diligently, and joyfully. God wants us to offer sacrifices to him with joy, with goodwill, and with diligence. God considered the magnitude of the sacrifice that Abraham offered diligently to him, and God decided to finally fulfill the promise that he had made to Abraham 24 years earlier, and which God had even renewed many times, several times thereafter. But the promise was never fulfilled. But that time, because of the sacrifice of Abraham, the sacrifice that he did, that he offered to God diligently and joyfully, and of course willingly, God decided to finally fulfill that promise. And at the age of 100 years, while his wife Sarah was 90 years old, Abraham could finally have a son, Isaac, as we know. So the sacrifice that we make for God, the sacrifice that we offer to God, has great power. The sacrifice that we offer to God is likely to bring us the fulfillment of the answers that we have been waiting for to our prayers. We might be praying for years on end without experiencing any answer to that particular prayer. But when we make a great sacrifice to God, that prayer is likely to be finally answered. And the greater and more diligent our sacrifice, the faster and greater is the fulfillment of the answers to our prayers. And in the same way, the greater and more diligent is our sacrifice to God, the faster and greater is also the fulfillment of God's promises to us. So the more we give God something very precious, the more we give God something that pains us much, something that costs us much, the greater also will God's answer be toward us. Now let's read Genesis chapter 22, another sacrifice of Abraham. Genesis chapter 22, verse 2, then verses 12 to 14. First, verse 2. Genesis 22, verse 2. Then he said, he is God. Then he said, take now your son, your only son Isaac, whom you love, and go to the land of Moriah, and offer him there as a burnt offering on one of the mountains of which I shall tell you. Now verses 12 to 14. And he said, don't lay your hands on the lad, or do anything to him, for now I know that you fear God, since you have not withheld your son, your only son, from me. Then Abraham lifted his eyes and looked, and there behind him was a ram caught in a thicket by its horns. So Abraham went and took the ram and offered it up for a burnt offering instead of his son. And Abraham called the name of the place, the Lord will provide, as it is said to this day, in the mountain of the Lord it shall be provided. So you see, later on, after Abraham got his only son Isaac, the son of the promise, Abraham was willing to offer to God the most precious thing that he ever had, his only son Isaac, the son of the promise, whom he loved very deeply. This action of Abraham gave Abraham the opportunity to experience the God of all provision, to experience God as the provider, to experience Jehovah Jireh. You know, the quality of the sacrifice that we offer to God determines the quality of the answer that we receive from God. The quality of the sacrifice that we offer to God determines the quality of the blessing that we receive from God. If we offer to God something of very little value, we will receive from God something of very little value. We may even receive from God a negative blessing, which, as you know, is a curse. But if we offer to God a sacrifice of a very great value, and which actually pains us very much, we will receive abundant blessings from God. And we will then experience Jehovah Jireh. We will then experience God as the provider. All depends on us. What do we offer God? What is the quality of our sacrifice that we offer to God? You know, a sacrifice is necessarily something that pains us. Look, for example, if I have a very nice suit that I like the most, and I take that suit, I offer it to somebody, that will be painful to me. It will pain me because I like that suit very much. And everybody admires that suit when I put it on. And I would like to be putting on that suit at very good occasions, very great occasions. But when I offer it to someone else, it will pain me. And that is a sacrifice. But if I offer somebody a shirt, a worn-out shirt, that I don't put on anymore, and which I will never put on again, that is not a sacrifice, because it will not pain me at all. So what kind of sacrifice do you give God? Choose a sacrifice of a very great value, and that will attract you the answers to your prayers, and that will attract you the fulfillment of God's promises for you, and that will make you experience the God of all provision, Jehovah Jireh. Dear brethren, God bless you abundantly beyond all your expectations, and have a very nice week.